Chart Update, 24th of June, 3-month anniversary edition. On a beautiful hot summer's day when the UK should be vibrant with sports and leisure, the agenda rolls on with one-way shops, hand cleansing and masks. Note to censors: we use only government data. If you have a problem with the results, speak to the government. Here's the top 30 with a couple of US states and cities for entertainment. 500 times worse than the Far East, and nobody notices. Belgium 150 times worse, and nobody notices. Italy just fading below 100 deaths per day, nearly 100% implied 14-day death rate. And the UK also touching 100% implied death rate 14-day, with a long slow decline as they milk the crisis. Look at the growth rates going flat at peak at bottom left. Onwards, Africa and Algeria, and look at that overall mortality. The stuff that dreams are made of. Oh, to be poor and not a vaccine target. South Africa continuing a long drawn out experience, finally curling over at way below Hubei deaths. Zambia with an overall mortality floored at 0.0%, so less than 0.05%. What virus did they have that we didn't have? A viewer tells me she's been called an idiot for believing me. Believing what? Daily reports from all the nations not in the grip of an agenda? I find that determination to believe in the crisis to be deeply disturbing. Americas, with Barbados determined to maintain its impeccable record, 14-day quarantine. Guess that won't be our vacation spot this year. The wife is gutted. Brazil, the no-lockdown Sweden of South America, that continent having a real experience, and 4.5 times Hubei in deaths, but daily deaths nearly flat, but oh so resilient. Canada with a second outbreak, please no second wave. 4 times Hubei, 7.7% overall mortality. Mixed feelings, agenda or honest? Not sure, but the virus is clearly not a major threat. Ecuador and a wild child with a long extended daily deaths, but something akin to normal curves bottom left. Again 4.6 times Hubei, it seems to be the American continent's figure. Worth noting that it had massive spike days, but also days of not reporting, which rather confuses the issue. But overall mortality very low at 8.7%. Mexico still climbing, a long drawn out experience, 3 times Hubei in deaths, but daily mortality in the teens and overall at 6.4%. Will take a lot to make it more than just a fact of life. Europe and Austria, let's try Austria, with its well-defined curves, 15 days cases to deaths lag, minuscule overall mortality. At 1.5 Hubei, they hardly played to the agenda. Whereas Belgium, EU HQ and world's hardest hit nation, 34 death days, 16 times Hubei, curves done, but at what a price. Look at that daily mortality, but still only 30% overall. Croatia, is that in Europe? With 0.5 times Hubei in deaths, you could doubt it. Reasonably well-defined curves, minuscule mortality, the world beyond us. Denmark, core EU, but difficult to see them messing about too much. Well-defined curves, minuscule overall mortality. Really didn't play to the agenda, did they? Finland, also well-defined curves, a bit spiky, but overall mortality 2.2%. Not an issue then, 1.1 times Hubei in deaths. France, look at those flat lines at the top. It's over, but at a price. 17 death days, 8.4 times Hubei, extremely high percentage of daily mortality, but still only 12.5% overall. Try harder or be glad it's over. Germany, and for the nation running Europe, it still seems to respect its people. 2 times Hubei, 4.3 death days, completed curves, and 3.6% overall mortality. Can we go home now, please? Greece, and 0.7 death days, less than 1 day, 0.3 Hubei. It's in Europe? You wouldn't think so. No friend of the agenda, and overall mortality 0.6%. Oh, to be in Greece. Hungary, 1.1 times Hubei, and minuscule overall mortality. Remind me, is Hungary a core EU member? That would be a no. Lucky for them. Iceland, 0.5 Hubei in deaths, a grand total of 1.1 standard days worth of deaths, and overall mortality flatlined and crushed at the bottom. We want whatever they had. Ireland, and whether the people chose to or not, they played the EU game. 14 deaths days, 6.62 times Hubei in deaths, but at least their curves are almost complete, lingering again at 100 a day. It is worth noting that even these loyal EU players struggle to get overall mortality to material levels. 11.9% of normal mortality is a footnote in the island's history, not an excuse to bin democracy. Malta, 0.7 death days, 0.3 times Hubei, a pleasing non-event. Netherlands, right next to Brussels, and it shows. 14.2 death days, 6.7 times Hubei, high daily, that would probably be mortality, extremely fat curve, a lot of milking going on, but still only managed 11.5% mortality. Norway at 0.9 Hubei in deaths, minuscule overall mortality, a good result for a European nation. Poland, 1.4 death days, 0.7 Hubei, minuscule overall mortality, not a factor. Portugal, a strong contrast to Spain to follow, neighbours but not kindred spirits or governments, a reasonably loyal 6 death days, 3 times Hubei, EU core member with a second outbreak. Russia looks like it's finally hit peak and at 1.1 times Hubei, not bad at all. Risible overall mortality. Not EU aligned, huh? Spain, and right up there with the UK and Brussels at 24.6 death days, 11.6 times Hubei, and lingering tail. High daily mortality, fairly high overall mortality, 20% still not a threat versus ordinary life, and 322% implied death rate. Sweden, and the saddest and most bizarre chart of all, may have to do a special on it. The price of defying the EU is clear. You will have no peak. It will linger and linger and linger till finally you submit. Ironic then that it is still only the 5th worst nation, and not even close to Brussels, still ahead at 33 death days, or New York, but it's still a cruel injustice, a normal and excellent result transformed into this. Switzerland, loyal EU state, even if not strictly a member, gets the standard 3.74-ish times Hubei, but clean and over in terms of curves and risible overall mortality. Never a threat. Turkey, 1.1 times Hubei, yet what did we hear? That you have to wear masks even inside a car? Absurdly low mortality, and yet they're still treating it like it's a critical nation threat. The Far East and Australia, pretty much a benchmark for how to do it, along with its fellow Far Easterners. 0.2 death days, a few hours of a normal day's deaths, and that's it. Wouldn't you think that someone would notice that the Far East is getting 0.2 death days and the UK 25, Brussels, Belgium 34, for 125 times and 150 times worse respectively, approx. Yet no one notices. This is also the sort of statistic that is bizarrely sloughed off by those so utterly determined to believe that all is well with government. Choices were made. Indeed they were, just not for our benefit. Bizarrely, while I don't formally follow Oz, it hasn't stopped the government exercising its muscle or treating the pandemic like a crisis, not an issue. We could really do with their kind of crisis. China is really Hubei, 84% of cases, 96% of deaths from memory, but it's in the World Health Organization data, so here it is. Oh yeah, and I see comments like, but China still got its second wave, or but China isn't over, whatever. Pick any Far Eastern country, but no, what second wave? Indonesia, and just a fact of life. It's climbing, but look at how shallow that is, and the overall mortality flatlined at the bottom of the chart in standard mortality. Japan, a rather bizarre chart, curves look normal bottom left, but oh so dragged out in the main image. Social distancing working? If it is, with overall mortality invisible, doesn't say much for ours. Korea, the original country that should have nailed Ferguson, but naturally he ignored it. 0.2 death days, pretty standard in the Far East. Absorb that. 0.2 death days, standard in the Far East. Not over here. Malaysia, invisible overall mortality chart. Says it all, really. New Zealand, and like Oz and the rest, 0.2 death days, 0.2 mortality. That consistency is a strong indicator that we're dealing with the real virus, shows just how badly we've been misled. I will not rule out that they also consistently did the right thing as well, but that's going to take some study if I get around to it. Clearly the US and EU had no such interest. Philippines ongoing, but at 10 deaths a day versus 2464 standard deaths is just a minor part of life. Singapore, a city-state, but quite a contrast with New York. Invisible daily deaths and invisible overall mortality. Cuomo virus or COVID Singapore style? Which would you choose? Thailand over and over with 0.0 death days. That means less than 0.05. Invisible standard overall mortality charts. Is it because they shut the sex bars? Vietnam, the country that had a death but cancelled it. A fitting sign-off for the Far East. Middle East near Asia and India, still climbing. Possible peak may be in deaths, but going to have to get a lot worse to get that overall mortality off the floor. Iran had it sorted, now getting a second outbreak. It happens. Some charts are actually half a dozen mini outbreaks, as you might expect. Not a material factor by overall mortality. Iraq, another sorted, but now off again, still barely at 0.5 Hubei. Africa, Middle East, neither quite Far Eastern, but neither showing COVID as other than a nuisance. Israel, like Germany and Austria, irony noted, does things properly. Over, mini outbreak maybe, overall mortality 1.2%, risible. Pakistan, again a slow climb, a few mini peaks, invisible overall mortality. Not really an issue then. UAE, our last country, and 0.6 Hubei, 1.2% overall mortality. These charts should have been core to every analyst, but it seems the agenda is more important. And there's our anniversary roundup, 3 months to the day since we created our first video, assuming we were dealing with a media greed hype of alarmist and false memes, how wrong we were and how deeply the rabbit hole turned out to go. There's a lot more that could be done, but whether it will be done, who knows. I'm Andrew Mather, a 60-year-old Brit, mathematician, financier, technologist, husband, biker, pilot, healer, whatever. Feel free to get in touch, andrew@peerlessreads.com or andrew@amather.com. Either should get to me.